and I want to welcome you to the first edition of the Fire Engineering Building Construction Awareness Project is what we're calling this. And what we thought we would do is the firefighters that you have on here today are all passionate about building construction. And we thought that the fire service needs a little bit of a boost when it comes to building construction awareness and understanding its effects on the building. So I wanted to give a shout out first to Halton for allowing us this opportunity. As we move forward, this will be a quarterly program, and we will discuss all types of, there he is.
Oh, yeah,
We will discuss all types of building construction and its hazards and its impact on you on the fire ground. And so again, we'll have these, and then also it'll be available for you, will be a handout of some sort that each time we do these, we'll have a program, a PowerPoint, or a white sheet, some sort of handout that you can add to any kind of training that you wish to do with you and your crews. And it's our hope that these stimulate you to get out, look at your buildings, look at the hazards, and understand the implications that building construction will cause you in the field, and to do the right tactics, consider the correct tactics. So today we're going to lead off with type 3 construction. And before we do that, we want to introduce our panel. And first and foremost, we want to introduce or tell you that one of our panelists who will be with us isn't here today. That's Glenn Corbett. And Glenn, does a lot for fire engineering, is a co-author of building construction for the fire service with the late great Frank Brannigan, who has impacted all of us that are on this panel. So we will be hearing from Glenn in future installments of this program, of this project. So first we'll go over to introduce Jack Murphy. Jack, if you would say a few words to our listeners and attendees about yourself.
Hello, guys. Just one of the guys who work behind the scenes at the FDIC. Been doing that for like 20 some odd years with Bobby Holton. Retired fire marshal, deputy chief. Have worked on the codes nationally, internationally for many years, along with Paul Dansbach and Glenn, and do a lot of things in New York City with the high rises.
Okay. James?
Yeah, so I'm James Johnson. I work I'm the token Canadian, so I'm up in Vancouver, British Columbia. Been in the fire service, started out 2003, and the last 10 years I've been with Vancouver. So I've been lucky. I get to travel around and teach about building construction. I started out at a pretty young age, working in the trades, and then I went through my full apprenticeship ended up being a journeyman carpenter. So I was able to combine the fire service world with a real background in kind of hands on the tools. And so now something I've done for the last 2 years is I represent the International Association of Firefighters as their building codes and standards guy. So attending the code hearings and as a technical committee member on several of the building codes, advocating for firefighters' interests. So it's definitely a topic I'm passionate about and kind of involved in a whole bunch of areas.
Paul, go ahead and introduce yourself. Paul Dansbach.
Thank you. Well, I started out in the fire service back in 1977. I joined the Rutherford Volunteer Fire Department. I remain as a member there. I did 10 years as a chief officer, serving as chief of the department for 2 terms. My career position is I'm the fire marshal for the borough of Rutherford. I've been the fire marshal since 1986. I'm also a fire instructor up at Bergen County Fire Academy, and some other teachings include FDIC, of course, for quite a number of years, and for Keene University and our State Fire Marshal's Office CEU classes for code officials and fire instructors and fire officers. So I do want to take the time and say thank you. This is, I think, tremendous honor to be included with this group, and I think that we have the opportunity to really make some impact out there and get some really good, solid information out there that people can use. You know, we go to fires in buildings every day across the country, and that's where we need to pay some attention.
Okay, and Lex Shady.
First of all, thanks for having me on here. I'm the new kid. I got involved in the fire service about 4 years ago, and I realized how much I did not know about building construction. So I've just kind of become a student of it, and I'm a small city fireman here in Central Ohio. And I'm excited to learn some more from everybody and just talk about buildings because it's a passion. So.
And I am Joe Pronesti. I'm with Civil Area Ohio Fire Department in Northern Ohio. Been on about 32 years. Do a lot of stuff for fire engineering. So I've been blessed to have that opportunity, writing articles, have a couple podcasts on the network, and very passionate about building construction, just like you guys all are. And today's topic is near and dear to my heart because that is what is predominant in my town, and that is the type 3 ordinary construction. And before we get started with our slides, I just wanted to kind of go around and say that, you know, to me, type 3, the Main Street, your downtown type of building was the bread and butter of the fire service for years. And we kind of gotten away from, I think, our tactics and our knowledge base because we go to so many, our new bread and butter is the room and contents fire and residential dwelling. And I think many departments take that mindset of a residential bedroom fire or that thought process to fire that hits in their type 3 ordinary constructed building or their main street, what we'll talk about as a taxpayer or whatever you want to describe it. And that doesn't always match up. And I just kind of wanted to go around our panel before we begin our slides to discuss type 3 on your thoughts of where we're at today with how we handle the type 3 ordinary constructed building when it's on fire. Jack, I'll start off with you.
Basically, you're looking at buildings that, you know, some of the concerns I always had is the open stairwell, you know, and the layout of that, you know, basements, you know, a lot of them are full basements down there. A lot of these buildings do have, the older buildings would have a boiler and some sort of fuel to that, maybe a gas line. Then is it a standalone? Is it attached to a whole block load? And how do they run out in shape wise? I'll show you that later in my slides. So, and then what you see in the front is not what you get in the back. And the whole idea here is that a lot of these older apartments, at least I'll be with Paul, a lot of the doors in those apartments weren't fire rated doors way back then. They were just laminated doors. They were borrowed light windows above the doors because there was years ago when these buildings came into prominence, there was not that much light. There was gas lights in the building. And that's why you have all these little coves and alleyways and shaftways. That's all borrowed light and windows coming in. And the first time that you'll see, we'll take a look at some of these buildings with fire escapes on the front. That really came about in New York City in the 1860s. Started to put fire escapes on as another means of getting out because of the open stairwell. And on top of that stairwell, Paul will tell you, this used to be a skylight too. On top, to get some more light into the building, that became more problems once the fire got out into the hallway. So those are my concerns with that. I've lived in the cities with these every day.
James?
Yeah, so and I'm going to get into it once we start going into the details, but being on the West Coast, we definitely have different considerations when it comes to like type 3 or ordinary constructed buildings because we have huge seismic zones and we have seismic considerations. So large majority of the ones on the West Coast have been retrofit and fixed up to deal with some of those issues that happen in an earthquake. But one of the big things for me is I think over the years, when more lightweight constructions come in. I think in the fire service we've kind of romanticized the idea of legacy construction being really secure and buying us lots of time. And I think that's one of the things that we can get in trouble with ordinary constructed buildings is we get in that mindset of, okay, we've got larger structural members, we may have more time. And we kind of forget the idea that, a lot of these buildings have been around for a long time. They're sick, damaged, have issues with it before a fire even starts in it. So, and then we get into the renovation and remodel concerns where, we have no idea what has happened in these buildings. So those are some of my things, is that kind of false sense of security we get with an older building, and then not knowing what's happening with them now.
Oh, your thoughts. Now you're from, again, you and Jack are from the Northeast.
Yep, yep.
Old areas. Your thoughts on the type 3?
I agree with your assessment of the issues with tactics and attempting to employ frame dwelling tactics at a commercial building. So my frame of reference really, Rutherford's a bedroom community in New York City. We're a couple miles west of Manhattan. Our downtown district was started to be developed in the late 1800s. There's a mix of predominantly ordinary constructed buildings, type 3s. There's still some wood frames left. I guess those are the ones that didn't burn down and rebuilt as ordinary. They're not huge buildings, but they are very, very challenging buildings. We can't employ those tactics. We're fortunate that we don't have a whole lot of commercial building fires today, or fires because of the fire protection has been built in over the years, held in check. But significant challenges, and I'm trying to think of where I remember the statistic from. It may have been from Chief Turpak's Fireground Size Up book. And I'm sure I'm going to flub these numbers somewhere along the line, but I believe the statistically, fighting a fire in a commercial building from a firefighter injury rate, it's 2.5 times more dangerous than fighting a fire in a frame dwelling. So what that does for us, and I think many smaller jurisdictions across the country, and it makes those incidents low frequency, high risk. We don't go to a lot of fires, as you said, Chief. Predominantly, we're going to fires in frame dwellings, and we don't do a whole lot of that, thankfully. So that commercial building is very challenging from the building's perspective, and it's challenging from the strategic and tactical perspectives also. And we're going to, get into and break down some of these buildings. And, what James made the point of, how buildings have been reinforced on the West Coast, and we don't see that here. And I think that's something for us as we go through this process is important for us to recognize. There's going to be some differences. There's going to be some differences in terminology. There's going to be some differences in construction methods and materials. And to kind of tack on, and I think James coined the term that the buildings are sick. I think that's a great term. And we'll talk about it maybe in one of the sessions. Buildings are deteriorated, and James is.
We may have lost them.
Okay.
We're going to go to Lex. Lex, your thoughts on this? And you have a where Lex is from, she has like me, a large, downtown area where it's an older group of buildings. And your thoughts on these? Lex, you've done a lot of blogging and writing and tweets on these buildings.
A big thing I've noticed in our downtown is getting, like James mentioned, it's really getting renovated right now. They're going through and basically redoing our entire city downtown. And so fully understanding what that means, combining the lightweight construction with the legacy construction, and then the amount of voids that are in these buildings, I think we kind of underestimate sometimes. We always think about the inherent voids that are in these, but then the acquired ones, whether or not they cover transom windows, they add drop ceilings, drop ceilings below the cockloft, all that kind of stuff. I think that's really important for especially, younger firefighters to get in those buildings and really look at it, because you can read about it in a book, but, I'm sure with some of the pictures you guys will have today, to get a visual of what that actually means for us, I think is really important to kind of study and understand. So.
One of the things that I wanted to touch on that Paul and James talked about the building and it's being sick and its age is, and James can maybe elaborate a little bit on this, but there's one year that I always focus on, a couple things with these buildings, at least in my town, and my town isn't any different than most older cities, is that the architects or the builders of these buildings 100, 120 years ago would stick the date on the top of the parapet wall or a cornerstone or whatever. And if our listeners or our viewers, I should say, can keep in mind 1933, at least that's what I think of, that before 1933, there were certain things of the code that allowed you to do things with the building, that fire cut beams, parapet walls could be as high as possible as you wanted. Then, as James was saying today, with earthquake or seismic protection, that after 1933 and after that earthquake, things changed a little bit on how we're building. So yes, they're all going to be sick, their age, but I've always thought of that one year. And for our viewers, James, what are your thoughts on maybe having that focus, that when you see that in that building, because when you go to a McDonald's restaurant, let's say, or a fast food joint, they don't stamp the year that it was built on it, or these old new type 2 auto parts places, or a dollar store. They don't stamp the year it was built. With these older buildings, they did. Just wanted your thoughts on that before we get into our slides.
Yeah, so when I'm discussing or teaching about building construction, I always, like from a very basic level, I always try and get the students to differentiate between old and new. And then from there, I go into it a little bit further, depending on the construction type. And for all of us, we all come from different parts of the country. There's different geographical area and timelines when things changed. Like I know in my city and on the West Coast, I know Seattle, we're really close to Seattle, it's similar. But for us, anything 1950 and older is balloon frame. Anything 1950 and newer is going to be platform frame. So that's something that may not be consistent with the East Coast, but the one thing when we're talking ordinary construction, that 1933 cutoff is pretty set for West Coast to East Coast, Canada, United States. That was a big change, and definitely something I highlight. And then again, when we're talking about retrofit, kind of the West Coast, East Coast, there's lots of places on the West Coast that have mandated the retrofit or the fixes after the fact for those buildings that are pre-1933, and that's primarily what I see in my area. So, but I really think that if you're thinking about that Main Street USA or that Type 3 ordinary constructed building, that 1933 is a really important kind of date to remember.
It's interesting that I was looking at a close call Mayday review from a West Coast city, and I can't think of it right now, but the arrival report, the officer radioed that it was a pre-33 building, which I thought, wow. And so there's some departments that must mandate that, part of their on-scene reports, that everybody, once they hear that, knows what they're dealing with construction. So that really caught me. And so I thought that was something very interesting.
And Joe, the other thing about, you mentioned they stamped the building 1905, 1930, but the other thing too is how many alteration projects has it gone through?
Right.
And they're done in sections too. I'll bring this up later, but they're done not all at once. They're done piecemeal. And that leads to other things too. The other thing we're finding out, and I'm going to be mostly highlighting residentials, type 3s, but they're illegally converting apartments and cutting out pathways. We lost several firefighters years ago in New York City because of that. So these are all little things in these buildings that are taking different lifestyles.
Absolutely. And we have to, that's probably some of the biggest issues that we have to, to think about is the renovations, because it is, James, you mentioned it, again, how they're sick. And Jack has mentioned many times as far as construction. What was that little tidbit you told Lex before we started taping as far as buildings?
Oh, all buildings talk to you.
All buildings talk to you.
And my caveat after that, I'm not crazy.
You're right. And so that is the hope. That's the overall for our viewers. You know, that is our overall hope here, that while you're watching this, that you get something out that, you know, if these buildings may not be in your territory, you may run mutual aid to where you have these, and they talk to you, that no matter what kind of building you're in, they're going to talk to you. And as we move forward with this project, when we talk about type 2 or type 4 or type 5 wood frame, that the building will talk to you. So a couple things about ordinary construction that I want all of us to to get into a little bit and discuss the overview of the skeleton of what is type 3 construction. To me, rather than, and if some of you want to get into the exact semantics of it, to me, Jack kind of hinted, and when I teach and would want our viewers to kind of get out, is that, you know, with the type 3, you're talking the dimensional lumber that are, you know, 2x8, 2x10, 2x12, very tall windows, in the fact that Jack was saying will allow light in. That when these buildings were built, you did not have fluorescent lighting, a lot of times hadn't been developed yet until, from everything I've seen in research, until after World War II. So they had to have light into these buildings. So you have higher, taller windows, you have the skylights, things that you just don't see today. Those things, when you see that, the stairwell, the open stairwell, transoms. A transom is over top of a doorway that would allow light in and ventilation. All these things that we're talking about create voids. And that is the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues with these buildings that we find. And as you can see, here's another one that, you know, you're going to have, these are from Glenn, these photos, but the load-bearing walls are going to be masonry. They're probably, and I'll let James talk a little bit more about this, is I've always kind of, a rule of thumb is that as you're facing the building, the Bravo and Delta, or the 2 and 4 sides, whatever your semantics are as far as describing a building, are your load-bearing walls. Would you say that's pretty much what you kind of go by, James, as far as a quick little description, if you would, of type 3 without a very wordy type of definition?
Yeah, definitely. One thing that and this is something that I've been pretty vocal about whenever I'm talking, is I don't like the 5 types of construction using those identifications when we're talking, like from a size up perspective. It's okay for education, but like if you look at the actual definition of a type 3 constructed building, like say in the NFPA, it's non-combustible load-bearing walls, but you can have combustible or partial combustible floor and roof systems. So, you know, we look at a building like we have on the screen right here, which is, you know, our traditional kind of unreinforced masonry building, like that type 3. But you can get into a tilt-up building on the West Coast that has a wood roof on it, which is allowed by their code. And by the letter of the law, that's technically a type 3 building. Non-combustible load-bearing walls with a combustible roof system. So for me, I like to talk about more features or identify, you know, when we look at this building, as identify it as an unreinforced or a brick building, as opposed to that big open slate of a type 3 building. I don't know if that makes sense, or I'm just always thinking things from a tactical, you know, a size up perspective. What information do I want to hear on the radio, or what information do we want to say on the radio that's going to give us the most intel to fight that fire?
The other thing too, James.
Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, if we take the white car in front of side A, all right, and the left of that is side B. At the top of the roof of side B, what's that What's that protruding off the roof there?
Some sort of,
It's a hoist.
Yeah, the
Hoist.
hoist to
That's
lift
a
goods and
hoist.
material in and out.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
see the two windows? That at one time was probably a door to hoist products into that too. So that's the old side of the building. Now take a look at the roof of side A at the top. What do you see up there?
for an old signage of some sort, probably.
What else?
Satellite dish.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
How's that? All right. Again, looking a little closer at the building. That would, for me, I see this building. It's a lot of vacancies there, but I still want to know, why do they have a satellite in there? That means someone's still downstairs, I assume, right, James?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
I like it.
The other thing with these, and we were talking about the windows, and again, our focus here is we're not, and for our viewers, we're not going to be able to deliver every single thing you're going to need to know about whatever construction we're talking about or whatever types of buildings that we're talking about. But when we're talking about voids, one of the things that with these windows, I'll try to do a little bit better job here, but with the windows is that in time, people will lower ceilings. Have, you know, a very tall window, but when you look through it or you get up close, you're going to have a drop space or some sort of void in between here that you could have all kinds of issues with that we'll talk about as we move through. But Paul, anything on your end that as far as describing a type 3 building?
Yeah, I agree with James. You know, we're moving away from the 5 standard types of construction, especially through renovations. And this photograph that's up now, that's actually a photo from our jurisdiction. It's just, this was a renovation, and this was obviously the second floor or the top floor of a building, and they filled the void or replaced insulation in the ceiling joist and then put a drop ceiling. So you could be layering combustible void spaces. You could be increasing the size of combustible void spaces. And again, you know, James's assessment of it's really not 5 types of construction. The majority of the buildings, especially in a built community, as Jack mentioned, you know, there's generations worth of renovations going on that certainly impact the structural integrity of the building, the fire spread potential of the building. And you can't, it's impossible, I think, to describe all that in a size-up report. So don't have an answer to that, but I think we need to be aware of that.
Lexi, when you were, and Lexi being our probie, we're going to call you our probie, too bad. But when you were in school, how much, and you're going to probably, I know you know where I'm going with this, my point, but how long or how many hours in Ohio do they give in the academy for building construction?
Is it like 4 or 8 maybe? It's not very much.
No, it's one day, really. It's anywhere from about 3 to about 6 hours. And if you take into breaks and everything else in the classroom, it's not a whole lot. James, in Canada with the fire service, I'm curious, in the fire academy, when someone gets hired and they go to academy, let's say a smaller city or department that may not have their own fire academy, how many hours do they get in building construction?
It'll be the same, mostly based off like a IFSTAR or a Jones and Bartlett curriculum. So
Yeah, okay.
not a whole.
What
heck of a
about
lot.
Jersey? Jack, Paul, Jersey, they same thing?
So I'll give you the answer that gets me in trouble all the time.
Go ahead, Paul.
It's 6 hours of building construction and 32 hours of hazmat. And my guess.
Yep. He went off again.
Oh no.
But go ahead, finish it for him, Jack. It was
Yeah, we do that at the academy.
hazmat,
Yeah, there's more hazmat than building construction, totally.
right?
But real quick, one of the things we do in Jersey since '85 is all the fire inspectors and anyone doing building inspections on the fire side has to take CEU classes. And those CEU classes are classes like Paul's and we did construction classes, things like that. And that's a 5-hour day. So there would be cycles of those going through. So we saw probably a gap and try to fill it that way. All right. But basically you're just trying to change things and keep people up. of the brass. Right now, we're all into the hybrids.
James, let's move into, you were going to cover void issues and collapse problems with the type 3. So I'll let
Yeah.
you take it from there.
So if you, so like Paul was saying before he got cut off, that picture that was just on the screen, actually all the pictures that I have, well, most of them I actually got from Paul because he's, you know, one of the experts on this topic. But for me, I really want to highlight just that something we've already been talking about is that void issue. So a void issue we can have just from the, you know, normal direction of the original structural members that we have. But then drop ceiling really is a big, really big concern. Drop ceiling too, we think about it, you know, we all do our firefighter, like our firefighter rescue or our RIT classes where we keep our wire cutters for drop ceiling. But when we think about drop ceiling, there's a number of catastrophic fire behavior events that have happened from, you know, smoke gases and stuff accumulating up above. So that's really what I kind of wanted to talk about was, you know, knowing what's above and that ceiling above. So we talk about the differences between West Coast and East Coast. So this is in my first due. This is what a good majority of the floor systems look like in our type 3 constructed buildings. So what you see here, I believe these are 2x10s, true dimensional, 2-inch by 10-inch. And they're all laminated together. So this is actually what we're seeing in the new mass timber movement. We would call laminated timber. And so this is what most of our floor systems are. You see this quite a bit through Washington State and Oregon State as well, but just because the amount of lumber that we have. So we might not necessarily have voids that are part of the actual floor system. We're gonna have a solid floor system, and our voids come from a drop ceiling and where we're running our utilities below it. But again, our floor systems in places like this are really robust, really strong. You know, they have a lot of strength in them. So it's one difference from West Coast to East Coast.
Yeah. And James, underneath the floor, it looks like that's the basement or the cellar area.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now that was basement fire. You can't get down there. You have to cut a hole in the floor for a resin distributor.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah, it's not going to happen very quickly for you.
I
That's
know.
for sure.
Yeah.
So,
I like the mass of it. Don't get me wrong, but now
for sure.
these are the things you have to think about. If you can't get access into that cellar, what do you got to do?
And I think it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier too, that like romanticizing, you know, mass alone or the, you know, the size. Like there's lots of great aspects that mass creates for us, but you know, that's just one small example of things that can create challenges for us as well.
I assume you're saying that I can find this on the first, second, third floor in the building too?
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so that's pretty similar, so or pretty common for us. I'd say the good majority.
All right, thank you.
Chief, I'm back.
Okay.
I'm not sure what's going on.
That's all right.
Issue is my
James, what
internet.
are we looking at here for our viewers?
Well, these, like I mentioned while you were off, Paul, all these pictures I got from you. So, well, most of them, but again, here's just another example that I got from Paul of drop ceiling and then an interior wall that's been framed on the inside of this. So those all create different void issues. And I'm a huge proponent of getting inside and, you know, taking like, you know, a portion of the wall or for sure reaching up above with a hook and finding out what's going on in the void space above. I'm always trying to evaluate that as moving forward or operating inside. Just seeing what's going on. Are there things building up above me that I don't know or below to the sides? But we can create lots of these void issues in these types of buildings.
Yeah, this, if I could interject a little bit about this building. Obviously, this was a gut, and it's good when they gut the building, it exposes everything. The 2x4s, if I remember this renovation correctly, the 2x4 stud walls were added because the joists were questionable. Either the lumber wasn't in the best of shape where it pocketed into the block wall. So the 2x4 walls were added to add additional support or to beef up the structure where the joists bear into the masonry wall. But there's if we had a better camera angle, there's probably 2 or 3 feet of cockloft above. The steel channel, the metal channel, is where they're installing the drywall. So this renovation increased the size of the combustible void space.
One additional thing that I see too is in 2009, they changed the energy efficiency codes. So buildings had to meet certain requirements depending on where they are in North America. So when you have a large renovation, say like a gut job like this, the original wall may not meet those energy efficiency requirements. So a lot of times, like what I did when I was framing and building still, is we would do things like this, where we would frame a 2x4 or 2x6 wall on the inside, and then we'd throw our bad insulation in there. And then we could take a concrete wall or a block wall, and we can meet that energy efficiency rating.
So the other point, and James, what do you think about this? And we talked a little bit about it, and I know I dropped out there a bit, about construction materials. This looks like some.
Nope.
Oh, no.
The Rutherford internet must be really bad.
It's whenever he has something great to say, it cuts out.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Oh,
Well,
God.
one of the things that I wanted to kind of touch on to our viewers, that if you're watching this and you're from a department that doesn't have a lot of staffing, you have got to think where the fire is going to be in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and think about your resources to get ahead of the fire. I think that is where you're going to succeed in making or breaking, stopping a fire in one of these. And I see it every time when I research a fire, or we've had a fire where you lose the building, is that you just didn't get ahead of the fire. And so James makes a great point with the voids, but always be cautious, because you can have, when we get into the cocklofts, when I talk about the cocklofts, you can have a lot of buildup of gases above you that you have to be very careful, but always get ahead. Just yesterday was the anniversary, I believe it was yesterday, day before, of a double line of duty death in Boston, Massachusetts, where the 2 firefighters were killed, where the fire was in a Chinese restaurant, in the kitchen, got up above their heads, and there was a sudden violent fire event that basically trapped them. So, these spaces have to be checked and considered, but this is, these voids are nothing to play with. You got to know they're there and how to get at the fire that's up there.
We were just saying that every time you have something great to say, it cuts out. So.
Thanks, James. And I started to ask, if you go back, Joe, on that slide, that block wall is some form of glazed block. What are your thoughts on that material? It's not a standard cinder block or concrete block. I suspect it might even be some form of clay tile with a glazing on it.
Wasn't all terracotta? Paul, it wasn't all terracotta block?
Yeah, it could have been like a clay tile, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is very brittle.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I'm not sure. That might be a difference between the West Coast, East Coast thing too.
It could be.
East Coast, we have a couple very large terracotta wall buildings that they'll have some masonry in front, but behind will be terracotta. What we got here, James? More void.
So again, just another picture provided by Paul, but just another picture of a void space. And again, just, this is a path for fire to travel for us. A lot of times we're running our utilities through these spaces. So, that's most of the time where a lot of our issues can start from when we're looking at a fire. And then depending on what the material is that we're using as our interior finish, that's one of the big issues that we see, is just the ability to get into these spaces. So if you're going topside and making holes that way, but if you're inside trying to pull ceiling and you have lath and plaster or any of those interior finishes that are common, it's quite difficult and time consuming to get in to address issues in these voids.
Yes. And on floors too, you're talking about pulling ceilings, drop ceiling, sheetrock ceiling, tin ceiling.
Yeah.
One right after the other.
This building that the slide is from, also there's a rain roof above this roof.
Okay. Oh,
Okay, I'm gonna mention that a little later on, but this is a good, I made a couple little notations to show the new and the old. You know, you
Mhm.
didn't have this kind of HVAC system or plenum that is going through when this building was built probably. But it's interesting how you have the incandescent light bulb and then
Yeah.
you the new
Ductwork.
HVAC ductwork that again, and I think we're going to hit on ad nauseum that it's these renovations and voids that you have to be aware of going into a battle plan or to have a good battle plan to save a block. And these are
Yes.
things that are
Yeah.
important to know.
And the other thing there, every breach into the walls or the ceilings and everything, who's looking at the fire stopping? This is a new renovation here. There should be multiple fire stoppings for all the wires coming through, the ductwork and everything.
And
This,
chances are it isn't.
What's that, Paul?
Lost him again.
What we got here? Ooh, looks like some Band-Aids.
Yes.
A lot
So,
of-
so that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. Just when we're starting to discuss collapse or potential for collapse, and also retrofit. You know, there's a lot of detail and stuff out there in regards to like rafter tie plates and tiebacks, and but what we're really looking at is things like what you see here. These structural tiebacks are telling us that this building's sick and that there's an issue ahead of time. When we go, you know, traditionally when we talk about type 3, we talk about those rafter tie plates that are tied back to the joist.
Yeah.
And but this is something really different.
Yeah.
This is trying to fix up something that's in bad shape to begin with.
Right.
And one thing that I found particularly when I'm looking at these buildings is if you're going to renovate a building or you're fixing it up, they'll spend a lot of time and money fixing up the front where you see. But a lot of times, if you can get around to the seaside or the alley, a lot of times they don't invest the money to paint it or to cover it up. So that's where we can see a lot of our issues.
And this is a good building, the mark should, and very cautiously, roof operations or not. Basically, a lot of it is not, particularly if you got fire showing through all those windows. Is it worth it to go to the roof with all those braces there?
Right, right. Lex, in your town, do you, because again, it's an older town like mine, do you have shown some different types of reinforcements and braces. Do you have a lot of this in your town? I know I do. And while we see this, I think one thing with the younger firefighters is that I think they're aware of this. I think they're just not sure exactly what it's going to entail unless you get inside and really look at it before the fire.
Mm-hmm.
We had some, not quite like this. We have a lot of like the little walls or the anchor straps. That's really common added into the buildings. You'll see some of this, like James said, on the seaside of our buildings. And I really like that point he made about going to the rear, because you look at the front and it may not look so bad, but the back tells you, I think, a much better picture of what that building actually looks like. Yeah, we have a lot more of those. And I think a big misconstruction for the younger generation is understanding that there's a difference between the wall ties and the anchor straps. They're not, some of, the wall ties are usually original and they go through the voids, but the anchor straps to me tell me a much bigger picture of the weakness of the wall there, especially if you have more than one in an area. And I think that's something, at least for me, that was not really explained very well in building construction. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I look for when I'm looking at the weakness of a wall, really, is for the presence of any of that kind of bracing.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I'll just add to that, again, just the West Coast sort of thing. When I see those rafter or those tie straps or the rafter tie plates or whatever you want to call them, there's a million names like you see here. That's something that they do a lot on the West Coast in the retrofit. So they'll come through and every 16 inches or every 24 inches or whatever the floor joists are spaced at, they put in these things through the wall and they're tied into those joists. And that's to give it some sort of a diaphragm system to keep it structurally sound. So when you're seeing them uniform, that kind of 16-inch up to 3 feet spread. Those are usually tied into your floor joists and tying that together. So,
and the other thing, if they're exposed, that metal rod's going onto the anchor side, and that's totally exposed a lot of times into the room.
Mm-hmm.
There's one other thing that I wanted to touch on is a lot of times I'll find we had one building, ended up taking it down, but it had a perfect example of these anchors in perfect symmetric across. They were made with the building to support the joists of the basement, holding up the first floor above the basement, between the basement and the first floor. And that is, again, everything that is what makes or breaks to me, part-time, volunteer, full-time. It doesn't matter if you're a professional, knowledgeable firefighter to understand when you see them in that kind of symmetrical row like that they're probably part of the original building. Would you say so on that, James, that when you see those, because I think a lot of firefighters will see, oh my gosh, a star. I see a star, that's it, it's bad. Maybe part of that original building.
Yeah, so when I see them uniform, it's telling me that's part of the original design, or the building's been retrofit to capture those points. If you've ever been to San Francisco and walked around kind of the wharf areas there, you'll see these buildings and it's just a random collection of plates and stars, no particular order. Those are the things that are telling me, that's kind of those Band-Aids fixing it up. So yeah, seeing them uniform and in line is a good thing for me. Seeing them all sporadic or like those big wall tiebacks that you see, that's going to engage my mind to start thinking a little bit more into it.
And that's a good point. When I said about the stars, I should have said sporadic. That's totally different. That's a red flag. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the clarification.
Lex, what were you going to say?
Do you guys look at the size of the plates too? The larger versus smaller. Typically, at least out here, the larger ones are kind of the symmetrical original, but then the smaller ones are what we're looking for as kind of the added reinforcement for weakness. Is that the same out on the West Coast?
I would say when I see the larger ones, they're going to be more like a tie rod and turnbuckle, like tying the building together. And then when I see the smaller ones, like when I see the small standard star, those are usually tied into the joists. They're running along the load-bearing wall where it's sitting. But again, there's, I think we'll keep stressing it through all of these different web sessions that we're doing. But this, Canada, US, West Coast, East Coast, Midwest, there's so many little slight variations. And that's why it's just key to get out into your areas and get into these buildings and look around and see what you have. Because, Lex can send me something, or I can see something she posts, and it's something that I definitely don't have where I'm from. So it's important to see those things.
What are we looking at here, James?
So this is just another example of a West Coast retrofit coming in and adding reinforcement. You see this all over the place, all, from Alaska all the way down to California. You see a lot of this stuff where they'll do a major renovation where they're required to retrofit, and they'll do a structural frame that'll, in theory, try to keep this wall intact. So again, during a fire, you're probably not going to be able to see a whole lot of this stuff, but when you're doing your pre-incident planning or your tactical walkthroughs, these are things that you definitely want to try and identify.
Okay, we're going to move to Murph's part here, and then we'll bring Paul back. Go ahead, Jack.
Go to the next one. Skip that one. That was just an intro. All right.
Okay.
Okay. This is a building that I dealt with. All right. Typical grocery store on the bottom, 3 floors above. This building is typical type 3. All right. But it did have an illness, and they were renovating the whole thing. When I got the video for this thing, Joe, if you see above the green awning,
Yep.
the one window there, that's the fire was blowing out the window there. All right.
This one?
Yeah, that one there, the fire was blowing out that window. Now,
Okay.
this is a video taken prior to the FD arrival, blowing out that window. Within 3 minutes in this building, the whole roof is a red glow. Okay? So I went, oh, what the heck's going on here? And I was doing this thing from a legal side, all right, working for somebody. And what it was totally going under renovations. Okay? So not too bad. All right? They're renovating. They have a permit. They're doing everything properly. Something happens. All right? Go to the next slide. And this is what caught my eye.
Wow.
What do you see in the street there?
Yeah. C-joists.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Right. That's not legacy building construction right there.
Right, right. They took out all the solid floor joists and roof rafters. All right. Yes, it's under construction. I understand what they're doing. It's fine. But my concern was, I hate to say it, this is a fire that happened at a good time. Get this occupancy, get it occupied and everything. Now have a job there. And you're going in with a type 3 mentality. And that's not it. This is hybrid all the way. All right. And that was the scary moment for me. I just said, thank goodness this fire occurred while it was going on. So my thing is that you see buildings being renovated in your community, stop the truck, get off, go see what they're doing, ask questions. Right? They have a permits, hopefully they do, but ask the questions, get involved then.
Did the fire department, did the FD&Y, did they know that they had, obviously they did not know that they had C-joists there?
No,
did they?
Not to my knowledge, no. All right.
What are we looking at here?
All right, so this is a renovation project, okay? I try to get this a little lighter. The box on the left is the entry, 1210. Keep that in mind, okay? The box on the left is 1210. The box on the right is a renovation of it. Can you see it has like a gray shadow in there?
Mhm.
That was one time 1212. All right, a street 1212.
Wow.
The windows to the right of 1212 on the first floor, I lived there. Okay, so I have a history of this building. So this is the building, and now the renovation projects come along. So on the door on the left, when you get into 1210, the first left box, these were what we call railroad apartments. They started on side A and went straight to the back side C. They were all called railroad apartments. So when you open up the door to the apartment, the door would open up into a long hallway going directly to the back, and a wall that was an interior corridor, all right, hallway inside the apartment, and all the rooms are off to the right. Okay.
Wow.
So they did this renovation, fine. And after we moved out, obviously, so long time after. Go to the next slide.
Let me clear this out.
Yeah. So what I'm going with now on the next slide is that they've taken, you see the red arrow? So that's the indication of the railroad apartments, okay? So now what they did when they renovated, they made the arrow at the bottom the new corridor. So
Wow.
on the railroad apartment, instead of having just, how would I say, one on each side, they were able to get 2 or 3 on each side going to the rear, all right? So you go from like a building that was 5 stories, 10 apartments, and now they're making them almost 20 apartments on the floors by just changing the hallway. Now, and this is the other thing we said before. Look at side A. Now you go around to side C. It was an open alley. Look at the cutouts in this. This is like a multi-E building. There's all the borrowed lights years ago. All right. You get the lights in there. All right. Now they took out in 1210 to 1216, they took out all the bulkheads to the roof. And the only one left is it's one at 1218. All right. So go ahead. The renovations, again, just take on a different life real quick. I appreciate they did this, they rehabbed it and everything else, but you're looking at you got to look at the building beyond what we're saying here, beyond type 3. All right. This is probably done in the 80s, in that sense. So they I don't know if they went full hybrid inside, but you just changed the whole layout of everything. So again,
Can I just add one thing? Sorry.
Yes.
So what was it, Jack? A couple of years ago now that I came out to New York, when for the
We let you in New York?
yeah they
Oh.
when you let Canadians across. But I was blown away when we were at the FDNY headquarters there, and
Yeah.
they had like they had like a big room with a whole bunch of computers
Right.
and screens on the wall. And as we walked through, they showed us that they had a couple working fires going on in the city.
Right.
And they had an officer assigned to that fire. They were able to pull up, what do they call it? Is it the SIDS?
SIDS.
Yeah.
So they were saying, in this building, there was a list of the Department of Building for New York, and it had all the, a list of all the times that building had been, permits had gone through and renovations.
Right,
and they were
right.
able to
Yeah.
send that to the instant commander. So
Yeah, you could do that. And in the larger buildings, we have the building information card, the BIC cards, in all the high rises, office and hotels, things like that. So I just wanted to give those listening in that you can take a typical type 3, totally change the hallway layouts and everything else. And that takes place a lot. I think I had a...
And the other thing that most, and for our viewers, most of our viewers are from departments like Lex and I work for, smaller to mid-size, and we don't have the sophisticated SID system like the FDNY, which is awesome, which was born out of incidents like we're going to talk about next month with 23rd Street. But if you have a group of these buildings or only a few blocks of these buildings, your SIDS computer is your phone and getting into these buildings as a crew or going through them. Lex, you guys don't have, we don't have any kind of pre-planned program. We got to get in, but here's a perfect example that if you have a group of buildings like this, you can multitask some things here. You can throw some ladders so you get some ladder practice. You get up on these roofs, take a walk around. Everybody and brother has one of these that they can pull up and take pictures, and it works. So just kind of curious, Lex, what you think on that.
So we try to do, all dependent, obviously, what we call walkthrough Wednesdays. So our officer will go find buildings in the area that are either being renovated, because we have quite a few of those, or just that we haven't been in a while. And we'll go in and we'll spend a couple hours walking through the building. We'll do a 360 on the outside, talk about, if there's a fire, on each side, different scenarios, what we would do based on the manpower that we had that day. And it's a really good way for us to, sometimes we'll find the occupancy changed in the building and we didn't necessarily know. So it updates us on that. It updates us on the construction styles that are being used, and just gets everybody kind of more comfortable, I guess, with some of these downtown buildings. Because like you said, it's not something we go on very often. So the more experience we have walking in them, and looking at pictures of building construction is totally different than looking at building construction in person. You don't necessarily always understand what you read, but when you see it, it makes all the difference. You're not in your building, you're not really what you're hearing.
And all of us have a tool in the pocket that we use every day, and we underutilize it when we go into the building. It's your phone camera.
Yeah. Okay, I paused recording. I'm going to try to pull Paul up one more time.
Okay.
And get to his slides. He's having all kinds of problems. I bet you he went through his computer.
Joe, I had 2 more slides there. I don't see them in the right after me.
Go ahead, Jack.
All right, I can't see the slide. I have the
All
old.
right.
All right.
Let's see here. We will slide again.
It's a slide with side by side 2 buildings with fire escapes.
How about that one right there?
It's showing me the initial slide. You got to go down. Oh, okay. Hold on. I don't know what happened here, but just go to that slide. Can you open up? Can you make that picture on the right bigger? Move it over. All right. We just had a little difficult with some of the slides. The picture to the right there is a typical 4-story type 3 building. This is a fire escape again on the front side of the building. I did this building too. I went there for another lawsuit, And looking at this building, I'm going, wow, it's a nice fire escape on front. All the bells and whistles this time, James, with the beefed up base and everything. So as you walk through the building, I went upstairs. Again, I said, oh, this was a railroad apartment at one time. Now I see 4 doors rather than 2 on there. So I went up to the roof, looked down, and there was a fire escape on the back. And on the back of the back end of the building, side C, the fire escape was older. I'm going, they just renovated this building. Why is the old fire escape there? And this is what I want to allude to, all right? Here's some of the things that the industry does to us, all right? You have these retrofits that come out. James talked about that. That's bringing the building up to code totally. It was built in 1930. We're going to bring it up to 2020 code, all right? So what they do is that they piecemeal it. There's a percentage where you have to bring everything up, right, James? You're shaking your head, right?
Yeah.
It's like, by us, it's 50%. So this year I'll do 25, and I won't do anything next year. I come back later, I do another 25. You know what I'm saying? Now you're left with the older stuff still in the building. The fire escape in the front had, how would I say, you go from one floor to the other, it had a rail around the open end, James, before you went to the step. The one in the rear, the code didn't require that. So it was an open area on the floor landing of the fire escape. So, and there was an individual who fell and died.
Wow.
All right. So those are the things. This is how industry beats us at times. Okay. So you keep that in mind when you're looking at these older buildings. Okay. I'm good. I passed the ball.
Okay.
Any questions there? No. Good. Great. Go ahead, Paul.
Paul, you're up with, we're going to talk some basements with Paul, who's now in on on his cell phone.
All right, so to kind of, I'm going to give an overview of what I think some of the concerns are. When this program goes up on the web, it'll be accompanied with a little more detail and some photographs to illustrate the points that are being made. I think the first concern that we're going to need to talk about is access to the basement. Access to the basement may be via interior stairway. It may be an outside stairway, door directly. Sometimes on these Main Street America buildings, the door is on the seaside. There are sidewalk, what I call trap doors in the sidewalk, or there might be a trap door in the occupancy itself. The last of those 4 choices or options, the trapdoor in the occupancy is probably the most difficult to identify if it's closed and represents a pretty significant hazard when it's left in the open position, hazard to the fire service when it's open. The stairway itself, treads and risers, and the width of the stairway is always a concern. And I think one of the points to make is, when the fire department is out on a call, delayed ignition on a heating boiler, chasing smoke through a building, take a walk around the occupancy, find out how to get to the basement, and imagine stretching that 2.5-inch line down that basement stairway. 2 firefighters, full year SCBA, dragging that line down that basement stairway. Those stairs, and especially in these older buildings, the late 1800s, early 1900 buildings tend to be the stairways tend to be very narrow. The tread and risers may not be a uniform size. The tread sizes tend to be narrow. In some instances, the stairway resembles more of a ship's ladder than it does a stairway, and that's especially true with trap doors, the sidewalk trap door or an interior trap door. The basement itself, there's concerns about the height of the basement or the depth, how far we are below grade. And it's going to run the gamut. We have some buildings in our jurisdiction that when Main Street was built, there were sidewalks. There were board sidewalks, and they lowered the elevation of the sidewalk to meet grade. And they, over years, renovated the buildings and lowered the first floor. So now we're walking through a basement, and everybody's crouched down because instead of it being a 7 or 8 foot basement, it's a 5 or 6 foot basement because they've lowered the floor, which has increased the ceiling height on the first floor, but created a very low ceiling in the basement. And conversely, some basements are deeper, 12 foot. So it kind of runs the gamut. Other concerns with the basement, low ceilings. When we do have that low ceiling condition and a high fire load, you have the potential for a pretty good fire buildup, rapid fire development, and early flashover. Should be a concern. Maze-like conditions. Some of these basements, you're going to find, and just encourage people to go out and poke around their buildings and learn them as they're out on runs. Corner buildings. Sometimes the basement you'll come in on the A side, follow the basement through, and it comes out on the D side on the side street, or into an area in the C side in the rear yard of the building. So those maze-like conditions obviously create some significant concerns for the fire service. The maze-like conditions coupled with the fire load is really a bad combination. The basement itself, obviously, I believe it's one of the most dangerous fires that the fire service is going to be called upon to fight. There's limited access, limited ways in, limited ways out. We don't have windows. If the crew gets in trouble, first, second floor of a frame dwelling, you get to a window, you're out. We don't have that opportunity. That interior stairway might be the only way in and out of that basement. So when you open that door, it's coming at you because, the products combustion are coming up that stairway. That stairway, is literally in some instances like the mouth of the dragon. You're making that stretch down through the product's combustion and a significant fire down into that maze-like condition with a large fire load. And not trying to paint a bleak picture here, but certainly, this is the reality of some of the basements that we're going to be dealing with.
One of the things that you're talking about basements and access about them is, I always talk about this. It's called the showroom bump out. And at least in Northeast or in the East Coast or where I'm in Ohio, these buildings were, if you're a younger firefighter watching this, I always say this: if you go to Home Depot and you want to buy something, they either pull it off the shelf or they go on the same floor with a forklift, grab it, and bring it to you. The same would be if an auto parts store or whatever. When these Main Street buildings, they kept their stock in the basement. That was their storage. You have conveyor belts that can take up half the stairs. You have that showroom bump out was designed in the front as a showcase to show dresses or whatever they were selling. Well, those platforms that they were on are flimsy pieces of wood that will give you direct access into the basement. They weren't made for people to be standing on them. So I've always made sure when we've gone through the buildings in my town that when we go downstairs into the basement, we walk all the way back toward the A side and look up where the showroom bump outs would be to see if you'll have good access for ventilation and also to get a distributor nozzle through. I think younger firefighters they play with the distributor at the fire academy maybe, and then that's it. And for 20 years or 30 years now, it's always been, we don't even need it. We don't use it. But you know what? It's designed for a reason. And that is one place in the building where you'll have a pretty good ability to quickly breach that floor and maybe get some water down there.
That's a real interesting point, Chief. And to me, it's an example of how things are going to vary in different construction methods around the country. We have, several older storefronts that have that raised platform for the storefront, but just about every one that I've seen in our commercial district, that platform, that show window platform, is superimposed over the original floor. So you don't have that opportunity. You have to, work your way through that platform and then through the original floor to get that water into the basement in that manner. So again, it's a great example of a local construction method that certainly in your case where that exists, that's going to aid suppression operations.
Lexi, anything in your basements in your town, in Bella Fountain that you have? I know you've sent some pictures as far as your basements, anything that you found or have had to deal with in your time?
Most of them, there's a couple that have where you can access it from that platform. Most of them you can't. A lot of our basements where the building takes up the whole block, the basement's continuous throughout the whole block. That's a big thing that I didn't realize was the case for us. Is that the similar for you guys where the basement is continuous across multiple businesses?
Well, Jack,
Yes, we have that condition.
and Jack, with renovations, you notice that you'll have separate buildings back when they were built, and Paul and James can chime in that in my jurisdiction, my town, they were built from one owner, one business, one building, and then through the years they were gobbled up by a land baron, and they've knocked out the walls of the basements for access. Jack, didn't they have to have some sort of fire door if they were to have some sort of breach? We have a lot of buildings where they have a fire door, but the fire door is either chalked open or gone. I'm just curious what you found. James, anything on your end?
Jack, you're muted.
Yeah, Jack, unmute. There you go.
I had a mute. I had
That's all right.
the lawnmower guys were here.
Oh,
The thing is that when you go from one building to another and you breach that wall in the basement, yeah, the code would say you would have to put a fire door there. The other thing too is that in dealing with these things, and Paul has dealt with them too, I have a 3-story building with a hardware store. The individual owns the building, the hardware owner. Right next door is another building that the hardware person also owns. But he breached through the wall, just what you said. Going from on one side, I have a hardware store. The other one, on the other side, which is a separate building attached, is a nail salon. But he breached the basement walls, all right, to go into that side. What we had to do, Paul, before the retrofit, you're sprinkling everything in the basement. All right, he's sprinkling it.
I think that what you just said there will lead us really well into what we're going to talk about next month with the 23rd Street fire.
Yes, it is. That's a new
absolutely.
23rd Street fire.
Absolutely.
It is.
yeah.
And those, again, for the listeners, just keep all the history fires in the back of your head. They do come in. You'll see them as you go into these buildings.
Yeah, Jack makes such a great point there, and I think it's something that maybe we can focus on in one of the sessions is historical fires. We're talking about basements and fires, and the Father's Day fire in Queens comes to mind. It was a hardware store. So, if you're going to a fire in a hardware store, it's going to be a mixed bag of hazmats and hazards. And, the occupancy type certainly is going to play a role in the fire load.
Another basement issue was a fatal fire in the Bronx where it killed a lieutenant and a probie. It was a dollar store, and they had to collapse in they just had the anniversary of that a couple of days ago, but they had either removed a column or did something with a column. But again, for our viewers, if you're a younger member, don't poo-poo or blow off when someone is talking or you're reading about a historical fire to say, well, that was 100 years ago. It doesn't matter to me. They do. And we will focus on that as this group. One last thing with the basement fires, and we talk about historic things that I truly took away from 23rd Street, which we'll talk about in our next session, was Vinnie Dunn, retired FDNY Chief Vinnie Dunn, talks about a lieutenant named Royal Fox and how Royal Fox saved more firefighters at 23rd Street because he did an old tactic that should still be in focus today of leaving someone at the top of the stairs. Back when no one had radios, they would leave someone at the top of the stairs to keep an eye on things or to talk to the companies down below. Well, in 2020, how many firefighters have radios? Everybody. And so we naturally feel, well, he's going down, we'll all go down. And our radio will help us. Well, it's still prudent to leave someone at the top of the stairs at these buildings, no matter what the situation, what you're investigating. And I make sure that we'll do that from now on, and it's all based on what Royal Fox did on 23rd Street, which I'm sure we'll talk about next time. So,
Chief, I think that brings us.
Go ahead,
Chief,
Paul.
that brings us right back to what you talked about when we started off. about old tried and true tactics. And I think, you hit the nail on the head today. Everybody wants to, and I get it. Everybody wants to be up near the nozzle, but leaving somebody at the top of the stairs is key. Not only, back then, key to communications, but today, key to moving the line in. If you make that 180-degree bend and try to pull the line, you're not going anywhere. So you need to have somebody at the top of the stairs just to facilitate the line stretch.
Go ahead, Jack. You were going to say something?
I just want Paul to, when I open up, he's going to give you the updated version. Years ago in the code in Jersey, we asked that they retrofit sprinkler basins. When I did mine, it was voluntarily. Based on square footage, based on the window and that. And that's statewide. Paul, just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, and it's kind of an odd situation. Back in the 80s, New Jersey proposed retrofit of all existing multifamily commercial buildings, basically every occupancy except 1 and 2 families. And if the basement or story is considered windowless as defined by the code, the original proposal was to sprinkler all of them. What the code ended up that being the requirements that were adopted were if the building is less than 3,000 square feet or the windowless space is less than 3,000 square feet, there's a fire alarm system, detection, supervised, signal going off site to initiate response by the fire department. If the windowless space is between 3,000 and 10,000 square feet, we still get that fire alarm and detection throughout. You get an NFPA 13 sprinkler minus the water main out to the street, but they had to connect it to the existing domestic service. And in some jurisdictions, all that did was put water in the pipe. In some jurisdictions where we are, and we've had, a couple of instances with these, if it's a 2-inch water service to the building, you're going to get 1 or 2 sprinkler heads that will, give you a pretty good distribution. But the key is having the detection. The fire department gets there early on. There's a fire department connection. The fire department pumps up the FDC, maybe even as the truck company's forcing their way in before the line gets stretched. And anything above 10,000 square feet gets a fully compliant NFPA 13 sprinkler. And that retrofit, at least in my mind, was not about property conservation. It's about firefighter safety, recognizing all the hazards associated, with fires, basement fires, windowless story fires.
Do you have any of those in your areas, guys? You have to.
Yeah, I have a building in my downtown where they have domestic sprinklers in the basement of a law firm. They have like 2 or 3 heads, and they put those in where they have their records and whatever they keep in their basement. But it's a downtown area. One other thing that, we didn't touch really on a lot, but, everyone remembers this, that when you're talking, these buildings are in your oldest areas. Your oldest areas are going to have your smallest mains or your smallest, oldest utilities that you may not have that. It's water in a pipe. Basically, in this building where I'm talking about in my jurisdiction, it's just basically water in a pipe going to a head. That it may not do a whole heck of a lot. I point out that it's there, but it isn't like a truly sprinklered building. You're still going to have some issues. I get some water on fire, but it's not going to put it out if you get a good worker in there. James,
Back to the discussion on fire load.
Yeah, exactly. James, Lex, anything on your end on basements before we go on to Cocklofts?
I'll just quickly say that for us, we're right on the Pacific Ocean, right at Vancouver's right on the water. So we don't really have a ton of basements just because we're right on sea level. So we have issues with water there. We do have some like in our Gastown and Chinatown areas where most of our type 3 buildings is where we do see some basements, but they're kind of few and far between.
Lex, I know you got tons.
So basically everything downtown has a basement for us. But I guess my follow-up to that question for James, so since not every one of your buildings has a basement, what are indicators that you guys are using to look for to tell you that there is one?
There really is none. It's just occupying space inside the building and then finding it. There's for the type 3 buildings, zero indication from a size up perspective from the outside. It really comes down to intel. Like we have our Gastown and Chinatown areas are where most of our type 3 buildings are. So it's just intimate knowledge of those buildings, knowing which ones have them. But as far as a size up model, we don't really have a way of knowing.
Yeah.
We're going to go into and finish up here with cocklofts and roofs. And, you know, these buildings, a cockloft was designed, again, when you're talking a difference between legacy and modern construction, again, think of it in terms of your old downtown versus a auto parts store that was just built last year in your jurisdiction. These buildings, because of the era that they were built, they would create a space where you would provide some insulation or a small space. Well, here you have some of these cocklofts vary in size, but it's raised above the top floor. And again, they can be very large spaces. When you have a fire in one of these cocklofts, again, they can build up just like the void issues. You can have large amounts of heat, smoke, and gas. But where a newer building, you may have just a very small, if anything, between the top floor or top floor, the open web joists of a new construction and the roof. Everything's going to be right on top of each other. With these older buildings, you have a large space. And one of the issues with this space that I've always thought of with these cocklofts is, number one, they're going to be slanted, and we'll talk about that in a second, but you're going to have to know if you're going to save these buildings, in my opinion. Now, this is more focused on building construction rather than tactics, but if this program is interesting to you and stimulates you, one thing you're going to learn how to do if you're a smaller department or mid-sized department is know how to ventilate these buildings and cut the roofs. It's going to make or break whether or not you save them. Now, to go along with what James said earlier, you have to understand there's the stability, but you're going to have to get the smoke and heat out of these cocklofts. And you can see in this picture here, this is such a good picture because you can tell that, well, number one, this building was built prior or after the building that it butts up to, because that right there you see is a painted sign that was on the side of the building next door before they decided to build this one that we're in this cockloft. One thing about cocklofts that you can see here that I kind of have a crude drawing and taken a sketch that I found that I basically put in some fire, is that if you have a fire in the rear of the building compared to the front, it's going to make a difference on spread, on how quickly the fire spreads. So a concern would be more so, now while they're all concerning, just a rule of thumb, that a fire in the rear of the building or the rear on the seaside is going to cause you more issues because you have more space for that fire to travel up rather than in the front and going back. Just something to think about, not 100%, but just something to think about. These buildings, like Jack mentioned, they needed to get light into the building. So many of these structures will have skylights, and they'll also will have a return that, Lex, what did you, I call them a return or a knockout. In one of your postings, you had gave these a name. What was that name?
So I've been told to call them apron walls, like on the sides of stairs. And I think
Okay.
a regional thing, I don't know, because there was not very many other people had heard that before, but there was the same principle. If you open that up, you could see through the cockloft if there was any smoke or fire in there.
And so that is important if you're going to vent or take out the skylights, that if you have to decide, am I venting the cockloft or the top floor? And in New York City and in large cities, they know what they're doing in doing this. I find that in smaller departments that don't face these kind of fires, that they're not 100% sure, and the knowledge base is not there to understand, or that you just don't have the experience enough. One good thing, a rule of thumb, My department responded on a mutual aid fire in a downtown area, the city next door to us, and the fire was venting right up, straight up through the skylights. The firefighters on scene thought, well, this fire is burning through the roof. It was not. It was coming right up through the skylight and the vents, but it had not burned through the structural parts of the roof yet. You got to get eyes up onto your roofs and get some kind of recon when you have these, the fires. No matter what, you got to get a crew up to recon and see what you have on the roof. Briefly, there'll be some cornices, coping stones, fancy tops that they put on these buildings 100 years ago to finish off the masonry wall. In my town, you can see in the bottom picture here that they have a lot of these fancy cornices, and a lot will have these coping stones. There isn't much holding these coping stones on the tops of the masonry walls anymore. Like James said, these buildings are old. Gravity is basically holding them on. So they're a hazard right there. I found in my town, and I'm curious what you have, these are just hollow. There isn't much there. James, Paul, Lex, anybody else, do you find that's the same where you're at, that the cornices are a lot of times just pieces of wood that are hollow that allow for rapid fire spread?
Yes, some of the cornices that I've seen are actually metal. It's metal clad. It's a metal clad cornice. And I think, Chief, the other point to be made about the coping stones, yeah, they're loose, you know, they're broken up after years. But I think we need to understand, why is the coping stone there? The coping stone there is designed to shed water. They're designed in a shape so the water doesn't collect on them. So they're rounded over, they come to a little peak, and they're glazed, which makes them very, very slippery. So it's something that we should really avoid stepping on, because your boots are likely to be wet. The coping stone itself might be wet or have a glazing ice on it in the wintertime. So, you know, there's a whole, you know, we break this down, grind this down to really look at that individual hazard of the coping stone. There's some significant concerns there.
Jack, any thoughts on the tops of these roofs? Now, again, they had to put something on top of these brick, on the masonry walls to finish them off. So that's where the coping stones, it keeps the moisture also from getting through there. But James, Murph, Lex, anything else on the coping stones or cornices? Again, you're not going to find these on the brand new dollar store that's been built on your street.
You're not going to find them on those. And I agree with Paul. They're mostly hollow by us, and some do have thin metal on it. But you're getting them back again in a different thing when you're dealing with green buildings. You're getting them maybe flatter or maybe a little pitch because it's shading the building now. Yeah. So the ornate things have gone away. They become more practical in the newer buildings.
And if you do see the ornate ones, like lots of times when they do a renovation or they do a new build in an area that historically has these older buildings, when they do put those cornices and stuff on it, it's going to be all foam, some side of a synthetic material that's highly combustible, glued onto the sides. So,
just something to be aware of. Cementitious finish on them, yep.
Right. Yeah. And here's something that's been around for a while, but it's called preserving the old facade. And keeping it braced up, and then put the new building and attaching the old facade to that.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
So you need to look at that. And Paul, you and I and James, we've been to the Indianapolis area many times.
Yeah.
And you go to the mall.
That's very true.
In the mall next to the famous steakhouse, you look at the buildings there. They're all the old buildings, and it's like, okay. Yeah, they just attach them all up to it. Now here's where you look at buildings and you go in like Lexi said, do your Wednesday walkthroughs. We looked at a building and I saw all the glass was all tinted. You know, what's that? So Glenn and I walked inside, and that's a stairwell. The old windows are there. They just put tinted windows on it, but the stair wasn't attached to the window. There was like a 18-inch gap once you got through the window there. And we went outside. We looked at it and said, you know, in New York, we'll mark them up halfway. mark something up. If you have things like that, mark it up. I understand what they're doing with the new stuff, but you want to preserve, it's great. It looks good, but you got to watch when they mix it.
Can we go back to the discussion on the skylights and that wall section between the ceiling and the top of the skylight? I think there was a couple of different, and again, it's an example of how terminology differs. And I think Lexi called it an apron. And I want to hear what James has to say. I've heard the term cheek wall used to describe that piece of wall. So, you know, there's at least 2 or 3 and maybe more slang terms in the fire service to describe that wall. So James, can you shed some light on the terminology there and what maybe the appropriate terminology might be in the construction trades?
I don't even know what that would be. Like I don't even know what I would call that if I was framing it. It would just be a wall. So
Okay.
can't be of any help there.
So, you know, it's interesting because if somebody said to me, you know, go open the apron wall, I would be looking at them like, oh, I you know, don't know what that direction is.
Yeah. Don't ever call it. What did you call it, Lexi? What did you say that was?
Is what I was told it was called. Like on the side of the stairs, how you have an open wall on the side of an open stairs. That's what that wall also. So.
I want to hear that over the radio.
Yeah.
As we finish off on the roofs, a couple things with the Cockloft. As you can see now, again, this is in my downtown, that you have these vents that are predominant on many buildings, and you can see them there at the top. Those can give you some decent streams inside there. I saw Danny Sheridan, who's a New York City chief. He had posted about vents, and it got me looking at them in my jurisdiction. And after I saw him talk about that, I noticed them more and more. But you can see there at the top, above the top floor windows, those 2 vents there, they could give you some stream access. So just something to look at if you're going through your buildings. Also,
Chief, those Cocklofts vents?
Yes, sir.
The other point to be made with those Cockloft vents is it might also help you identify where firewalls or separations might be in the Cockloft. For instance, if you've got, you know, significant smoke condition, black smoke, coarse smoke pushing out of one, and nothing coming out of 120 feet away, well, there's a reason for that there's no impact on that second vent, and maybe there's a firewall, fire separation somehow through that Cockloft. So that would be an indication where the firewall might be, and gives you the ability to take a stand there.
Excellent point. Excellent. Thank you. Just like roofs, when we get on the roofs, you know, these buildings are going to have all types of not only besides skylights, but vents, whirlybird ventilators, dumbwaiter shafts, the whole gamut. And you have to get up on top. If you are going to cut, one thing to consider is that they're going to have years and years of tar built up on there. And I found that in researching and in our own training and in venting fires in our jurisdiction, that the tar will bind up your saws, your K-12 saws. And you have to be ready for that, anticipate that. So, you know, another problem I found is that many smaller departments said, okay, we're going to go up on the roof and cut our Main Street roof during this fire event. And they go up there with their one cutoff saw and it dies out. And then they're done. If you are going to go up to a roof, make sure you got a couple saws. If you're supposed to, or the rule of thumb is to re-roof your house every 20 years. Well, let's just say you take that rule of thumb to these downtown or these type 3 buildings, ordinary constructed buildings, and the building is 100 years old. That's simple. That's 5 years worth or 5 layers of tar that you got to get through. So another thing to always think about when you look at the age of the structures. Finally, I wanted to mention what is, you'll never know about these unless you see them being built, or you get in them and there's some sort of hatch or some sort of thing, is a rain roof. A rain roof is in layman's terms, a roof that is built over an original roof that may have had some sort of leaking problem or issue. We have a couple in my jurisdiction where we had a bowstring truss. They put a peaked roof on top of a bowstring. But here in this picture, there is a lot of room between the original roof and I'm standing in and the top and the rain roof trusses. We certainly don't want to go into these like that, but I took this picture to show how much space you have. And again, the only way you're going to know is to see them when they're being built, or if there is some sort of little trap door or some kind of access, which is very uncommon. Anybody else on the panel have any thoughts on rain roofs or any quick observations or takeaways?
Yeah, Chief, they're more common than we think.
Yeah.
I think there's, a fair number of them out there. The roof is superimposed over another roof because they wanted to change the architectural flair of the building. The roof was bad. There's any number of reasons they do it. Flat roofs are problematic, so they put lightweight wood trusses over it and, superimpose a new roof. I would like to, if I can, just digress back to your comment about the flat roof and the roll roofing, the asphalt felt with hot tar. For a brief period in my life, I worked for a roofing contractor, and we used to cut in vents. There were plastic vents that just, was a passive vent into the Cocklofts. We worked on some buildings. The roof material, the roof covering material, from the top down to the sheathing was sometimes 4 or 5 inches worth of roofing material. And, we're dealing with buildings that were built in the late 1800s. And you're right, every 20 years. And that doesn't take into account the patches that went onto the buildings in the years in between, installing a completely new roof. So significant challenges associated with a lot of those flat roofs and the old built up roofs. Then add the slag, the stone that's on some roofs, and it's a significant task to get through that material.
Yeah. And the thing that you brought up about those roofs, Chief, a double roof like that, the thing here is once they button that up, in 10 years from now, who knows that's there?
Right.
That's the challenge I give to everybody. Who knows that's there? We see it there, but where's the intelligence we're leaving behind for everybody? And here's something that unique, and Paul, hear me out on this. If you have a high-end store, say like a big jewelry store that's 1 story high, they take the roof off and they'll put metal plates down.
Yeah, steel plate.
And then put the tar on top. All right. So take a look at areas where you have these. I see a lot of this in stores where they have cell phones and things like that. With the burglaries, they're starting to put on metal plate roofs. Then put the tar.
Yeah, not in our jurisdiction, but I've seen photographs of it done the other way, where they put the steel plate. They cover.
Okay.
They attach the steel plate to the underside of the ceiling joist.
Yeah. Well, they're there.
To keep burglars from coming up down through the top.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Something.
Yep.
Go ahead, James.
Something I was just going to say is with the rain roof issue is we see there's obviously a lot more information out there about asbestos and then actually getting rid of materials that have asbestos. And so what we see is roof overs done rather than getting rid of the old roofing materials or anything that contains asbestos. It's cheaper just to build over top of it and leave it in place rather than, the dumping fees and all that, the remediation that needs to be done. So like Paul was saying, it's something that's more and more common. And then I always go back to, the Sesame Street. One of these things is not like the other. If you're in those kind of areas that predominantly have flat roofs and you see a peaked roof come in, that's, really easy telltale that you're going to have some sort of an alteration or potentially a roof over or a rain roof.
You go to the seaside too. I know we have one where from the front you can't tell that it's a rain roof, but if you go around to the back, you can see the difference in the materials used. So it's kind of our indication for some of those that we have them too. So
Well, I want to thank our panel. We had a few technical difficulties, and if you made it through this far, Fire Engineering will send you something special, I guess. But I want to thank our panel. I think this is going to be a really intelligent, fast-paced, hopefully moving forward, but a good tidbits of information for you to all take away into your jurisdictions, that it'll be a good background, a good starting point for anybody watching this to get out and get into your buildings and to understand. And we have the East Coast, we got Midwest, and we got the West Coast. So we have everything covered that you need to, that you're going to, from viewpoints, I guess you could best way say it, when you are going out. So you'll hear different viewpoints based on wherever you are at. As we close up, any final thoughts from Jack, anything you'd like to say as far as moving forward, either on type 3 or what we're going to do on this panel every quarter starting next year?
No, I just think that, the idea, the more we get out there to the fire companies, those who are not heavily involved in codes and that, and say that all this is what Sean DeCrane, who we said the last time, taming your own environment.
Yeah.
You need to know more about these things than ever before. The construction industry is throwing things at us left and right these days with new techniques. Totally. And I'm
Right.
dealing with high rises, even in different aspects of things, even beyond these little buildings. So look in your areas, take care of that. But again, get off the truck, go in the building, look at them.
Paul?
Chief, first, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel. This is really tremendous. I think there's tremendous opportunity here to, talk about so many different subjects related to building construction. So I really look forward to working on these in the future, and getting some materials out and get it on Fire Engineering's website. And I guess maybe they'll dedicate a tab or a page to this program as we move forward. I think it's an excellent opportunity. Again, thank you, and thank all of you for participating.
James?
Yeah, same. I'm just thankful to be a part of it. And anytime I do anything like this, I definitely learn more than I offer up. So I'm thankful for that.
Lex?
thanks again for having me. If nothing else, I learned a lot today. The one advice I'll give to newer firefighters is if you don't necessarily have the time to get in building shift, go off duty. If you walk into a business and tell them you work for the fire department, you want to learn how to protect their organization, they're going to let you walk around, take pictures. I've never had anybody tell me no. And then if you see something that you don't know what you're looking at, take a picture of it and take it back to your senior guy or some other firefighter that can help you learn, because studying the book is great. You need that, but you're really only going to learn if you get in the buildings. So,
Joe, a quick plug before you close. Joe and I and Glenn worked on the tab on Fire Engineering website. On the tabs there, you'll see fire suppression units, fire companies. We put a tab in just for building construction. All right. So when you go down there, you see different things unique, but the whole thing will jump out with building construction. All the things we're saying, the different types of fires they have with these buildings. So we made that its own separate tab. Thank you, Joe. And thank you for this, Joe.
All right. Well, thank you. And for our viewers, again, thanks for joining us. We're going to fix up the presentation and put some notes in it, and we'll have that as an attachment to this. And from Joe Pronesti and Lexi and James Johnson and Paul Dansbach and Jack and Bobby Halton and Glenn, who will join us next time. Want to have you be safe, and if we can help you in any way, let us know. When we see you again, we're going to talk about the 23rd Street collapse with retired Chief Ed Butler of the FDNY. So we'll see you then. Take care.
Take care.